I'm Joel Gunderson.
I am Adam Rack.
And this is Winesplained,
a podcast where we talk about wine, sustainability, and sort of whatever else we want to talk about. We'll explore some questions, explode them a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Over the last few years, we've had a lot of people ask us a lot of questions about the wine industry because we work in a winery and in restaurants. And so this is our attempt to answer some questions. But as Adam just mentioned, we find ourselves exploding the questions a little bit more than answering them. Today
we're talking about exclusivity, which I think is intricately tied to wine, and we'll talk through that tonight. But it's the practice of excluding or not admitting people, restricting to a particular person, and we're good at that in this industry. Very good. But we'll talk about why with one of our guests today. I'll let you introduce.
Yeah. So we're incredibly excited to have Erica Landon here to help us kind of muddle our way through this topic of exclusivity. Erica is one of the co-producers of Walter Scott.
Yeah, partner in Walter Scott.
In Walter Scott. But to me, Erica has kind of been this sort of like hero in the wine industry ever since I got started, 11, 12 years ago.
Oh, I'm blushing.
That's what we do. So I'm excited to have you here to hear some of your story and to hear how your story pertains to this question of exclusivity, and to actually, get some wisdom from you as we dig into this topic.
As we explode it out.
Let's explode exclusivity. So I would love, just as we get started, just to hear a little bit about your journey in the wine industry.
Sure. So currently my husband and I have a small winery in the Willamette Valley called Walter Scott. And we both spent quite a bit of time in our young adulthood working in wine in different capacities. And my journey started in restaurants, much like you too, where I was working the floor, serving, and fell in love with wine. I worked for some really inspired people who who shared, I think, the intricacies and the culture of wine really beautifully with their teams. And so I caught the bug and went chasing it. And I ended up, my original job was at a restaurant in Selwood called Gino's.
Mm-hmm. Delicious.
And the Cardi family, they're old family friends, and they are huge Italian, they're just a wealth of knowledge and have one of the best Italian lists in the city, probably on the West Coast. And so they would just have these lunches with their teams, and we'd all have food and taste with the distributors, and we'd learn a ton. And so then I wanted to go, I also like snowboarding. So I ended up at Timberline Lodge and working in their wine program alongside Dave Alali, and learned a bunch about Oregon wine and West Coast wine, because it was exclusively a Northwest program up there. And so then I followed that and came down to the Willamette Valley and worked for the Ponzi family for 4 years. And during that experience, actually found myself completely in over my head with wine. Like, I thought I knew about wine. I had this idea that I had all this information about wine, and I inherited a wine list. And one day, a couple of French women came in and sat down and had lunch at the Dundee Bistro and asked me about a wine on the list, which was a white wine from the Loire, and said, do you know if it's dry or if it has sugar in it, if it's sweet? And I said, oh, well, it's from the Loire, so it must be a dry white wine. And they're like, oh, you're so cute. No. And I sort of blushed and said, well, you might know more than me. And I walked away, and my best friend, who was the chef at the time, Jason, said, you know who those, because I told him the story. I'm like, I'm a little embarrassed. This is what just happened. He's like, you know who those women are, right? And I'm like, no. And he's like, that's Veronique and Isabel from, from Domaine Drouhin. And I was incredibly embarrassed. And at that point decided if I was going to do this, I really needed to figure out what I was doing. So I enrolled in sommelier courses and went through the International Sommelier Guild, and just was floored by the history, the, agriculture aspect, the cultural aspect, all of it. kept going, just kept taking more classes, went through the court up until advanced, and then met my husband, and we fell in love and started a winery and put every single cent we had into it. And that's where we are now.
So you've also ran quite a few lists around Portland,
yeah.
right? Doing a little bit of research. I mean, I haven't been around Portland for that long, so 7 years myself, but it sounds like people really loved your lists, like really put you in high regard when you were running like 1001 downtown. But you had wines ranging from $1,300 down to like $20 bottles. Is that right? So so I'm guessing you have a lot of experience with exclusivity and pitching and this tier.
I was really fortunate in that situation to have ownership that really believed in the wine program and funded it. It costs a lot of money to have a wine program, and oftentimes if times get tough or you have to tighten the belt financially as you're running a business, the wine program is liquid asset literally, and so it is tends to be weeded out or thinned out pretty quickly. And so that was an incredible learning experience for me. And having that budget to say, go get First Growth Bordeaux, go get Grand Cru Burgundy, go get, all the Tête de Cuvées you want. That was amazing, for sure.
As you told me your story, it got me thinking. Your journey into wine really kind of paints one of the pictures of exclusivity. And maybe, not necessarily like a malicious exclusivity, but more one that I think the average consumer struggles with, and that it can either be intentional or unintentional, but that is, there's a lot of knowledge, for those of us who are professionals, that we had to dig into, study, and as we get into these positions of taste making, sometimes we either lean on, or we exploit that, we blow that up a bit in order maybe to protect ourselves, to protect our brand. Did you, as you were kind of journeying into like kind of being like Erica Landon in the wine world, did you find sort of like, even as you were trying to move forward in your education, trying to be enthusiastic about wine, did you find kind of these barriers?
Absolutely.
To entry? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think on so many levels. I don't know how many times I was interviewed for whatever publication, whether it was Portland Monthly or the Oregonian or, whatever the story was, maybe it was Somm Panel Magazine, and asked the question, how does it feel to be a woman in a man's world? That I got asked every time. And at some point I was like, how about we don't talk about the fact that I have a vagina? Let's talk about the fact that I put together this list.
Right.
And I think I also, it's interesting because for whatever reason, there's this pomp and circumstance like attitude that comes along with knowledge. And I ran into that a lot, whereas the farther you went up the ladder, the more these barriers that you ran into. And even for a long time, for 4 years, I taught for the International Sommelier Guild and did the diploma level 1 and 2 in San Francisco and Portland. And I would have these students, and they were just launching into their own journeys into wine, and they were excited about wine. But you would run into students that for whatever reason felt like because they were going into wine, because they were on this journey, that they were somehow cooler or they were higher than other people, and were very easy to pass judgment.
Right.
And that was something I felt like I had to battle a lot, saying, there are wines that go all the way from a, $5 bottle on the shelf all the way to, like you were saying, at this point, the tens of thousands of dollars, depending on where we're at in the world. And, to take away all the marketing and all the pomp and all of the the perceptions that have created exclusivity or somehow created the sense of quality, and saying that, there are wines here that are very well made, and there are wines here, sorry, bump the table.
No worries.
There are wines here that are very well made, and there are wines here that are very well made, but that doesn't mean that you should disregard this wine because of a price point or a label. And also, when you're talking to other people and you're talking about your excitement about wine and how, wow, I'm on this journey and I love it, make that infectious. Like, share that enthusiasm, share that, like, make it accessible for other people around you to feel excited about it and to jump on board, rather than making them feel stupid because they don't know the different varietals in chocolate.
Right.
Like, who cares?
Yeah.
So lots and lots of.
Yeah. And that's a gotcha moment, right? When somebody's like, you're the som and you're up front and someone's like, so what are those varietals in chocolate? And you're like, God damn it. Did you really just ask me?
You're like,
they're
good wines.
I can read them on a page, but I'm not Basque. So
yeah. And I'm totally butchering them when I'm reading them. So
yeah, I mean, I feel like I was fortunate when I first jumped into the experience on a more professional level to have DJ with the International Sommelier Guild. And she said, you don't need to denigrate one wine to celebrate another wine.
Exactly.
And I did love that. But, like you mentioned, really high end wine and kind of the, as soon as you jumped into your experience, you immediately, it seems like, ran into a sort of hierarchical approach to wine. It's like, you are more important if you are dealing with certain price points in wine.
Yeah, if you're running a wine program the publications reinforce that, right? If you're running a wine program that has the depth of all the, best wines in the world, then you're somehow much more important in the wine world and more highly regarded as a sommelier than if you're running a really amazing wine program that's all about natural wines or all about tiny producers who are farming and producing on a very hands-on level. That somehow is less important than this. And that, I think we're at a disadvantage in so many ways in America too, because it's not part of our ingrained culture.
Right.
We're a prohibition state. We still are a prohibition state, with that can go down that. And so rather than it being like, rather than this being like, hey, I can go get this empty bottle in my cupboard and go down to the corner store and fill it up with a local wine that came from, a 5-mile radius that I can go home and drink and have it be part of culture. It's like, no, I need to be reading magazines and figuring out what wine comes from who and what score it got. And that's the wine culture in America. And it's
I have to admit, like, as the sommelier who has championed keg wine for the last decade.
Yes, you have.
I often feel, and maybe it's just projection, but like, I often feel like this sort of attitude towards me as being sort of the second rate sommelier because of because I'm working with keg wine, and it's really interesting because, I work with you.
Yeah.
I work with some top producers,
some of the best producers
in the Willamette Valley. And I go and taste through their barrels to make these programs. But at the same time, like, just this notion of the bottle itself is often the sort of point of exclusivity.
And do you have any idea? So we chose to stop using capsules on our bottle. We've used capsules since 2009 when we started the winery. They're this beautiful marketing polished finish on the wine. And Ken and I, every time we bottle, we'd look at all this waste and packaging and plastic that couldn't be recycled that was shipped from Spain.
Right.
And we're like, why are we doing this? We don't need this. And just removing that, how many people within the industry have commented on it, how somehow bothers them. And for us, it's like, but we're not putting that impact on the planet anymore. And that's a minute detail when it comes to what you're doing. And I think there is a perception about screw caps and there's a perception about keg wine, but I also think that the way I've always been so enamored with how you did the keg wine program, because you because there are certainly people that are like, we'll just put this in keg and sell it off.
Yep.
But this was a curated, very thoughtfully produced keg program
Right.
that you did that was also about removing this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And for a number of reasons. But, like just digging into the Willamette Valley a bit,
Yeah.
we, I mean, we have, this is where we live, this is where we
Yeah.
are. And so like,
Beautiful place.
beautiful place. But we have a price point in this valley. I mean, if we talk about exclusivity, we have a few things that are going for us. We have small production,
Yes.
right?
I mean, low yields. We're talking about dry farming that immediately cuts out how much we can produce here. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of this podcast, we're trying to focus also on sustainability.
Yeah.
And I think we want to talk a little bit about where that comes into exclusivity, how they interact, because
right.
Especially in the higher tier, that ultra premium that we see the market growing almost exponentially in, as just prices keep going up. $75 bottles are standard in a lot of tasting rooms now. And that's not approachable for, I mean, I even shrink at that. And
most.
Yeah. So where do you see that coming in? Are we talking, is it positive that we're saying, let's take less out of the environment? Or is this all a marketing ploy? How much of this is just real exclusivity, or just by happenstance?
I think, God, there's so many layers to that, because I think being a producer in the Willamette Valley and somebody who, we're in a very unique position that we have, because of the way that we built the winery over the years. We have lower overhead than, let's say, if we built a huge estate on the most expensive land in the valley. We would have a much higher monthly nut that we would have to pay for. But that being said, even us with, the way that we've built the winery, costs are growing, and that's making it very hard to keep price points. I mean, we've always wanted to have our Willamette Valley be in a price point where it can be glass poured. Well, that's becoming less and less feasible when, you're getting emails from the growers saying that their farming costs are going up, X percentage point. Your glass is going up to 11% this year. Our glass went up, and that was on top of another growth the year before. Labor shortages in general. I mean, I don't know how we will be able to farm all the land that's under vine in the next couple of years. And there's more going under vine every day. And then you include that with the cost, because you only have so much land in the Dundee Hills. You only have so much land in the Chehalem Mountains that's plantable. Okay. You only have so much land in Neola Amity. And there are definitely new AVAs that are coming out, and that they have beautiful land as well, but it's limited. And so you have this limited land that is going up by the acre, how much it's selling for every year, to the point where you can't afford to buy in.
That just immediately cuts off the price point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a point in the next, Ken's 51. How many vintages does he have left? That he's going to physically be like, I want to huck barrels around and fill them.
It's hard work. Yeah,
because he's actually doing that in our winery, and so, maybe it's 15 years. I don't see a point in the next 15 years where we will be able to buy land because of how unattainable it has. And we don't own land. So we buy from these amazing growers that have been farming for decades, but we don't own any land in the valley, and I don't see it happening. So there's a point right there where there's an exclusivity ceiling that small producers, that much like us are hitting, where we're like, unless we got tons and tons of investors and lost control of our,
So what you're saying, I mean, in a sense, that very rapidly the Willamette Valley, the product that we produce here in the valley is basically only affordable to 10% of the population, really, like if we're thinking about it. Or less
realistically.
Yeah. I don't know. I have a skewed vision of that. But what you're saying is that very rapidly we're moving into a stage where only millionaires get to play at production, and that they're going to they're going to control the contracts. I mean, we see that already, right? We
Yeah.
see contracts getting scooped up by different larger entities that we won't necessarily name.
You know, like vineyard contracts, like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you
Yeah.
guys are working with.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
we've been lucky, you know, under our
Yeah.
brand over the past few years to scoop up excess
Yeah.
and find the extras around. But I mean,
Be in the right place at the right time when the right fruit comes open.
yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
last year that was even harder than ever. And
Yeah.
that's starting to go down into Southern Oregon fruit.
Yeah.
Starting to see the same thing in the Columbia Valley, although more mechanization out there, maybe more access, just purely due to the size, the volume. But
Yeah.
then the Willamette Valley is not a part of that name anymore.
Right.
And it's not here.
And I think as we think about the Willamette Valley, we do celebrate our valley for the quality of the fruit that we produce, right?
Absolutely.
And we love that. But is there a point? You know, this is sort of like the conundrum is that
Yeah.
like when does quality become a sort of tool of exclusion? Like when does it become an accomplice to not allowing people to enter into it? And you know, like I know there's different movements, you know, and I look at them as to like placing more regulation on what can be called Willamette Valley or
Yep.
what kind of wine can be made in our valley that is called Willamette Valley. And, you know, and part of me is like, well, we need that. But then part of me is also like,
oh, but that also is scary.
well, that's also scary
It's
because,
both,
because
yeah.
who gets to control
Yeah,
that?
exactly. And who is it? Yeah. No, I think there's a very big double-edged sword that's for me, because in my mind, much, you know, like you just said, the fruit quality in the Willamette Valley is unbelievable. The farming quality in the Willamette Valley is unbelievable. I mean, I don't think like it's hitting on all cylinders right now. And I believe in my heart that the wines from the Willamette Valley can stand on stage with the best wines from the best regions all over the world, shoulder to shoulder, and in blind tastings. And they have for
Yeah.
many years. But I think like wider and wider net of like just the quality across the board is fantastic. And so you want that success and you want that recognition, but with that recognition comes money and investment and pushes property property values up, and it also pushes how much land is being planted. And that is something that we'll never be able to control how much land goes under vine. And that's unfortunate when you see big hillsides with old 500-year-old oaks disappearing
Right.
and going under vine.
Right.
And that's a whole nother conversation for another podcast.
Right. Well,
David.
I mean, it all ties together because I mean, you know, we, in some ways with exclusivity, with a marketing strategy of exclusivity, we are hanging our hats on this notion of scarcity.
Mm.
And is it a notion of false scarcity?
Well, there's both, right?
Right. You know, so it's like, look, like I know that, you know, Walter Scott is this tiny production situation, but we see in the market so often other brands trying to tool themselves into this notion that they aren't and cannot make that much wine.
Yeah. I mean, there's actually naturally controlled exclusivity. Like if you look at, Barolo or Barbaresco, or if you go to Burgundy, you're talking about Montrachet. Well, Montrachet is one place and it's never going to get bigger. Right. And so because of that, it naturally is exclusive who can afford and who can own it because it's this big. Right. The same thing can be said about vineyards in the Willamette Valley. Seven Springs is this big. Ex Novo is this big. Right. Sojo is this big. You can't plant anymore. And so that is going to naturally exclude how many people can make that wine from that specific site. And so you have those natural phenomenons that are going to create exclusivity and limit or scarcity, what you're saying, which is going to, if you then have demand for a specific vineyard, that is going to over time drive the price up because then the fruit becomes more expensive because of the reputation. And then, it's just like this leapfrog of price point. But then you have exclusivity and scarcity that's built through marketing, big marketing machines, whereas you have wines that the average person would think, oh my gosh, this is such a special wine. It's got X amount of points from X amount of, magazines. And it's so, I mean, oh my God, I'll be so excited to get a bottle. Whereas actually that wine is made, in huge, huge quantities, but it's
Right.
all this marketing perception that's been
Right.
created.
Yeah. So it's playing off this sort of, I mean, we still operate in a cultural structure within our industry that
Yeah.
celebrates exclusivity, and at any point in the road really tries to reinforce that.
Well, there's a reward for it, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there is a financial reward if
Right.
you can actually attain that. And
But I think of places though like Killingsworth, New Seasons, and
Yeah.
back when I worked there like 13 years ago, the good women who ran that program
yeah,
sold tens of thousands of dollars of wine a day
yes,
at $7 to $9 a bottle.
yes,
And I mean, they knew their stuff,
yep,
and they ran a tight program. I mean, it's a tight store, and that was one of the highest selling programs in the city.
yep.
I mean, I always go back to that. I think, wow, like, but they weren't celebrated for it. Like they didn't. There's no Portland Monthly
There was
article.
no glory.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's like, and often there's negative reinforcement. It's like, oh, you're putting your wine in keg.
Yeah, I when I first came on to this brand, I started doing sales not long after I started, and I had buyers that wouldn't even talk to me because they go, I know what you're doing, I get it, and it's just not for me. And it's like, you didn't even think about the wine, you don't know anything about it.
You didn't even hear what I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, Joel has on his list gotten exclusive things that are $45 a bottle.
Yeah, that
wholesale.
are exclusive to Cooper's Hall.
Not available anywhere
Yeah.
else, and that's by those standards would be undrinkable.
Yeah, a barrel selected with John Paul, or a barrel selected with Doug Tennell, or a barrel selected, it's like,
I mean, is that, do we have a responsibility to fight back against this? And is it even possible?
yeah,
It's such a big, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine, through your own personal journey, you've found times where you had to fight back against the notion of exclusivity.
Yeah.
And, moments when you found yourself encouraging the notion of exclusivity too. I mean, I know I do.
Yeah.
I love me some, Chassagne Montrachet, and I love selling it, and I love celebrating it.
And, you want to be, I mean, it's the same. It's a double-edged sword where you're like, yes, I want this. You want to have your wines to be accessible and then help inspire and bring people into the wine industry. And you want them to be accessible, but you also want to have your wine next to a Chambolle Musigny, a blind tasting, and have it stand on its own legs and be considered,
Yeah.
So
I think it's tricky, right? It's this balance of celebrating the integrity of craft,
yes,
which necessarily costs a lot of money. Like it costs a lot of time. It costs a lot of devotion. It costs a lot of blood and sweat, and it should be valued.
That is such a brilliant point, because I think craft in itself, whether it's wine or leather goods or food from a restaurant and a chef, like anything that is, because you can produce a lot of wine on very mass scale and have it be delicious. And then you can have something that literally somebody put every ounce of their thought and care into over this élevage of time, whether it's, creating some sort of art or creating some sort of leather good or creating, any number of things. And I think, thank you. And that time and care does demand to be paid for, I think.
Right.
Because if you're not paying for it and you'd rather just pay for something that's mass produced,
right,
in another country or whatever, mass produced anywhere.
Another country like California.
Like California or, Tualatin, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
No, I'm just kidding. I think that you need to, you hope that people see the value in that craft, right, and then attention to detail.
So going back to maybe a more holistic view of, like where we are today, where we're trying to raise up and call attention to maybe women in winemaking, and asking that question over and over as if we're all surprised it can happen.
Right.
We're having that reckoning with people of color in this industry, which have been excluded the entire time.
And we're also fascinated by why there's not more in this industry.
Right, yeah.
When they are especially with our Mexican and Latinx farm workers, they are the backbone. Literally, they are integral to this.
This industry wouldn't exist without that community.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, as we start to come up against these other hurdles, climate change, wildfires, as we saw a few years ago, where we all started talking about, like, how do we even deal with this? Where does this play in with, do we shut off our industry? Do we just sort of keep focusing on what we do best? How do we raise up other people?
Yeah.
While trying to,
Education.
So education. I mean, that's
I've been incredibly just overwhelmed by the work that Ahivoy has been doing. They're a group that is they through auctions and fundraising have found are raising funds to put agricultural vignerons, vineyard stewards, I believe is the proper term, through education and rising them up through the ranks within the vineyard management system. And we know personally of story impacts where people are now running crews. And I think there's going to be exclusivity. There's going to be money in this industry if we can, and I know this sounds sort of silly, but if we can use that for good and turn that around and pay it forward and pay tribute to the people that help get the industry to where it is, that's the very minimal that we can do, the least we can do,
right.
And I believe, you can support those communities through Lutheran Family and their legal services. You can support through Salud, which is amazing, through medical, but the power is in education. The power is raising people up and giving them stepping into a different part of the industry.
Maybe some of the power is within our own companies as we plan for the future, how we actually create pay rates and distribute kind of the money that we're earning.
There was a disgusting and shocking slide. I don't forget what the event was. I don't know if it was assemblage, but there was an event at some point where there had been a salary survey. And the salary survey was like, it was rating like men and women in the same positions in the wine industry. Have you heard about this slide?
Not this specific slide, but
so they were going through it and it was like GM roles and vineyard roles and all these things. Anyway, every single slide, it was like men's salaries here, women's salaries here, men's salaries here, women's salaries here, until it got to vineyard management. And it was women's salaries here, men's salaries here. And there's only one reason for that.
Yeah.
And that's because the people of color who are in those roles, who are men, are getting paid less than the women that are in those roles. And it was put up, and I remember somebody took a picture of it and they put it on social media. They were at the event and I saw it because I wasn't at the event, but I saw the slide and it became this like conversation that many of us had together. It was like, how can that be? And it's like, oh no, this is how it is. And like you're saying, making choices about payment, excuse me, please cut that out, pay scales and compensation that are fair across the board, that include everyone within the industry.
It is. It's a long road that we have ahead of us. We again, we're fighting generations of a structure of exclusivity that centuries. We go back to we've talked in the past about how high-end wine demands high-end care. Like you have to have property to actually store good wine, and sort of even the structures of why certain grape varieties have been known as noble grapes versus peasant grapes. The understanding that Pinot Noir is considered better because it ages better, as opposed to like, who fucking cares?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Do you like it? Cool.
Yeah, I mean, but seriously, it's like, oh, it's worth a lot more because somebody can store it
Right.
for a long time. Well, you got to have real estate to store that shit, you know?
Yes, you do.
And it's not, of course, like, I love Pinot Noir. We love Oregon wine. But yeah, I mean, even as we get down to the grape varieties themselves, we see
hierarchy. I mean, look at you can see it with like California Napa versus Oregon and Pinot Noir, and Burgundy and Bordeaux. Just the money, how different the money is in those two regions.
Right.
It's an interesting thing. But I think this industry, unfortunately, has been there's been a specific targeted exclusivity through marketing and through pricing for a long time.
We talk about a lot, we're a luxury good. Nobody needs this.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, they say they will do, but it's,
I struggle with that a bit too, because I feel like nobody needs it, but it's also essential, as in having a good time is important, and feeling good about yourself, feeling luxurious is important.
But there are definitely a lot more inexpensive ways to get a buzz and have a good time.
Yeah.
So
I mean, this, when I was doing research on this, it all came back to, psychologists would say, dominance seeking. It's always about this, and this is no exception. So I think Joel has a great quote that he brought up.
You want me to read from the Bible, huh?
Oh, yeah. We need to read from the Bible.
Yeah. No, I mean, so, there is this notion that, the very wealthy should have the best. What's interestingly enough, in the book of Proverbs 31, verses 4-7,
this feels like I'm back in church.
It actually says, "It is not for kings, Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, not for rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, and deprive all the oppressed of their rights. Let beer be for those who are perishing, wine for those who are in anguish. Let them drink and forget their poverty, and remember their misery no more."
Yeah, it's very medicinal, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think it it ties drink. It ties what we do into modes of oppression. It's fascinating, and it almost like, you have this little ancient writ right there that's like, holy fuck. Like,
yeah, I mean, when I started going into the history of wine, there's a really great book that's out of print now by Hugh Johnson called Vintage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it goes all the way back to Mesopotamia,
Mm-hmm.
and how wine and cuttings were moved through the world. And then you remember, you hear stuff like that, and it reminds you that at one point in time, beer and wine, fermented products, were the safe things to drink. Right. And so that and also were used medicinally to lessen anguish and lessen pain and anxieties. And it's fascinating. But
I feel like I'm going to personally do a better job of celebrating those moments.
Yeah.
That you're celebrating those,
not take them for granted.
Yeah.
Small bottles that I would never buy personally, because I maybe think I'm better than that. But my friend brings over, and it's a great time. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
It's also great to have friends like that bring those kind of bottles of wine over. Yes. We all need them.
Well, we got some lovely wine in front of us.
Yeah.
What did you bring today for us?
So I brought this is actually it's interesting. There's two different names on this wine, but they're the same vineyard. So you guys brought the 2016 Sojourner Vineyard, and I brought the 2019 Sojo Vineyard because in an act of exclusivity, somebody decided that they owned Sojourner, and so the name was changed, which was not even why I brought this, but it's funny how it ties into that. So this is an amazing vineyard that good friends of ours, Denny and Thelma Peso, own, and they've been farming in the Eola Amity Hills since the 70s. It's interesting talking to them about, when they first planted their original vineyard, Eola Springs, which I don't know if you're familiar. You're familiar with that vineyard, that they ended up selling it to Judy Jordan a few years ago, but they planted it all ungrafted, and talking to them and saying, hey, why did you make that choice? And they're like, well, we didn't know if this was going to go in the Willamette Valley or not. So we, rather than spend all this money on grafted vines, we just stuck sticks in the ground and they grew. And 40 years later, they're pulling them out because they have phlox row. But they're really amazing people. And they purchased a piece of land above Eola Springs 20 years ago and started planting Sojourner,
right,
AKA Sojo Vineyard. And so it's just one of those vineyards that we came across and fell in love with and have worked with for a while now, since 2013. And I think it's just very classic Eola Amity Hills, where just lots of red fruit and spice and polish and restraint and acid. And
you're really focused on the Eola Amity Hills, right? That's
yeah, which is we believe in it through and through. And we're also predominantly Chardonnay, which is a funny thing that I didn't bring one. Wasn't very organized this morning.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yes,
I mean, it hurts my feelings, but it's like,
I know,
like I'm going to go see Joel, but I'm not bringing Chardonnay.
I actually got in the car and I was like, oh my God, I forgot wine. I was like on I-5, I forgot wine. And then I opened up the back to put something in there when I was down below. And I'm like, oh wait, I have this wine in the back seat. I forgot about.
I actually had a dream that you forgot to bring the wine, and
that's why you
I actually grabbed it 2016.
You and I are very in tune, it seems. So we do about 65% Chardonnay, and for us, Eola Amity Hills is a cooler region. It's rockier region, and it's they used to say that it's harder to farm. Like the farmers are harder, and the vineyards are harder, and the grapes are. Anyway, so there's a lot of work and that goes into producing wine from the vineyards here. It's very, very rocky soils that will kill a tractor. And there's these crazy winds that come through and cool it down. And so you just get this intensity of fruit and an intensity of acid. And for the style of wine that we're inspired by, this is where we believe it can be grown in the Willamette Valley the most precisely. I mean, we get some fruit from up above in Ribbon Ridge and have tons of respect for all the other AVAs for sure. And we get a ton of fruit from Freedom Hill, which is down south outside of the Eola Amity Hills. So it's not an exclusive thing, but we're definitely pretty biased when it comes to that region.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Lovely wines.
Yeah.
Exclusive by territory.
Exclusive by territory. Well, I mean, end price at, when things are expensive.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think I have no idea where we're at in time. So, yeah. Way beyond as our conversations, I believe, will.
You guys, aren't you guys going to cut out some of that stuff?
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Hopefully, some of my rambling.
Yeah, no. Well, we appreciate Erica for coming in today, bringing us some beautiful wine and
beautiful discussion.
Yeah, beautiful perspective on our industry here in Portland and in the Willamette Valley. So cheers. Thanks so much.
It's my pleasure, you guys. And it's an honor.
Thank you.
Big fans of yours.